presentation follows really nicely from the ones that we've already seen today. So on behalf of our research team, I'm sharing the work we've done about recruitment and consent practices in a research study that involves people with aphasia. So this research that I'm presenting today is supported by a research grant from St Vincent's Hospital, Melbourne, has ethical approval through the HREC. There's no other financial or non-financial disclosures related to this presentation. But before I launch into the recruitment and consent practices, let me set the scene a little bit for you. So aphasia is an acquired communication impairment, often the result of stroke, that can impact a person's ability to express themselves, understand others, to read and/or to write. So it can impact any one of these aspects or multiple aspects. Sometimes, but not always, there can be a cognitive impairment in addition to the communication impairment. So although almost a third of people who have a stroke will have aphasia, they are severely underrepresented in stroke research. So some recent work has come out that shows that only 6.5% of stroke RCTs explicitly included people with aphasia. And another recent review reported that only 1.5% of participants in stroke randomized controlled trials had aphasia. This is despite people with aphasia wanting to be involved in research, and they say they see it as a way of giving back to the community. And it's really unclear why people with aphasia are excluded from research. However, it's really likely that it's got to do with an assumption that people with aphasia don't want to be involved in research or don't have capacity to be involved in research. What this means is that the exclusion of people with aphasia in stroke research, it raises questions about whether the research is representative of the stroke population and also whether the results are applicable to people with aphasia. So the case study that I'm using today is based on work we're doing at St Vincent's to address clinical practice gaps in stroke care for people with or suspected to have aphasia. And for us, it was really important that we developed a study protocol that offered opportunities for people with aphasia to be actively involved in the research as study participants. So our traditional consent pathway, which a lot of people will be familiar with, looks a bit like this. We have a person who responds to a study invitation, they read the information, they ask some questions about what participation means. They may discuss participation with others, and then they'll make a decision on whether to join or not. And if the person decides to participate, they sign a consent form. And we've had lots of discussion today about what that consent form looks like. So this typical pathway is extremely challenging for a person with aphasia because the process relies heavily on all four aspects of communication. So that's understanding others, expressing yourself, reading and writing. So when we were talking about designing this study and what this pathway looked like, we really wanted it to be inclusive. And we focused on ensuring that the study information was presented in a way suitable for our participant group. And we also really wanted to make sure that for everyone who wanted to participate, we were able to confirm whether the individual had capacity to consent. So with these points in mind, we looked at this traditional review pathway with members of our research team who have lived experience of aphasia, and they helped us design a slightly different pathway. So we added a step to confirm capacity, and we developed an alternative consent option when capacity to consent was not clear. And we embedded adjustments and support throughout the entire recruitment and consent process. I'm going to talk you through those now. So the first thing that we did was we created aphasia-friendly study materials. So this is one of the study information sheets. We called this one the Easy English version. We had a second version which was called Easier English. The reason why we had two versions of the study materials is so that a person with aphasia can actually select the material that, best meets their communication needs. So when I say aphasia friendly, I'm talking about the language and the visuals of the material. So in terms of language, we use really concrete words, familiar words. We keep sentences short, and that decreases the processing effort for the reader. We use larger font sizes, headings, keywords, bullet points, and pictures, and all these things are to support understanding. And the way we see these study materials is they're a tool that is complemented by in-person support. So we relied on supported communication to have conversations with people about participation. And when I say supported communication, all I'm talking about is techniques like using written keywords or visuals, using body language, gestures, or modifying the environment. So for example, decreasing background noise, they're all to aid communication. So the strategies that you use with a person will vary depending on the needs of the individual. The other thing we also did was always encourage the friend, partner, or family member to be present in all these discussions as well. Coming back to, determining the capacity to consent, we only did this once a person expressed interest in being part of the research. So the decision about capacity was based on a person's ability to answer questions about the study, and all questions were based on content in the study information sheet. The person performing the capacity check was the person who decided whether the capacity was demonstrated by this potential participant. And knowing that people with aphasia have different ways of expressing themselves, we supported a variety of ways to answer the question, such as a verbal yes or a non-verbal head shake no. So what this looked like for us, so this capacity check, if you like, is we had 6 questions that a person had to correctly answer to demonstrate their capacity to consent. So where a person wasn't able to answer all 6 questions, we sought then consent from the proxy. So we introduced the task as to check that I've explained the research clearly to you, I'm going to ask you some questions. All you need to do is tell me yes or no. And as you can see from the list of questions there, there's a mixture of yes and no. So it could be, is this project about aphasia after stroke? And the answer is yes. Or it could be, do you have to be part of this project? And the answer is no. If you want a copy of all of these questions, all of these are published in our study protocol. So touching on some of the other adjustments and supports within the decision and consent steps. So we also provided additional time for people to weigh up whether taking part in the study was for them, so they could discuss it with their others or close others and or researchers. We ensured that the person with aphasia guided how they wanted to communicate their decisions. So for example, a person might point to a yes box on the consent form, or they might head nod when asked, do you agree to take part in this research? Where people wanted to be involved in the research, however, it was unclear whether they had capacity to consent, we used assent from the individual and sought formal consent from a proxy. So when we put this all together and compare it with that traditional pathway, you can see that every step of the recruitment and consent process is tailored to meet the needs of people with aphasia. And I've highlighted those in the boxes here in green. So at the consideration stage, the study invitation information sheets are aphasia friendly. At the decision stage, we allow extra time. It's all guided by the person with aphasia. We have that capacity confirmation stage using the yes/no questions. And again, at that consent stage, consent can be given verbally or non-verbally. We have consent by the proxy option when capacity to consent is unclear. In terms of our reflections, people with aphasia, they do want to be involved in research, and they can be involved in research. We found that virtual meetings work really well to discuss joining a research project. Having people with lived experience of aphasia on the research team, it really helped us with the development of inclusive practices, and getting those study materials right for people with aphasia. Involving researchers experienced in supported communication in the recruitment and consent process is essential. I recommend working with speech pathologists for this. And there are wonderful resources, guidance and learnings from others. They're all publicly available that you can draw on. So in closing, not every person with aphasia will have the capacity to participate in research, but with adaptations and support and consideration of the individual, many people with aphasia can be involved in research. And that was my final word.
Thank you, Renee. If you could stop sharing your screen. There's been, again, the chat has blown up and I'm getting that wheel of death happening again. Hopefully it'll go away. I'm going to keep talking. The chat's blown up and lots of support for these resources. I think I'm going to ask one question, Chair's choice. How did the HREC and the Reg office go with reviewing the ICFs that you've obviously spent lots of time done in my humble opinion, all the right things and going in the right direction for what we need to be doing with consent forms, because realistically, they are butt covering documents, to quote Beck from earlier on. How did the HREC and the Reg office go with receiving and reviewing these? Did it give them a level of discomfort that they struggled with?
That's a great question, Sophie. And the HREC at St Vincent's, we've been working with them over a long period of time in the area of aphasia research. So I think over that time, there's been lots of education of the HREC from the speech pathology department about what does aphasia mean, and how can you best present information to people. So when this protocol went through, there was no questions about using those adjusted study materials.
Perfect. So good collaboration with your Reg office and HREC. I think we've already spoken about the CTIQ templates, and I think a lot of sites are piloting them now. And for those of you who aren't already, certainly get in touch with the team there. That was awesome. Lots of work, lots of thoughtful work gone into it. Thanks so much for sharing. And if
No
you
worries.
have Carrie saying engaging HRECs is key, that's right, Carrie. So if you can have a look through the chat too, Renee, and see if there's anything that you want to engage with there. There's been lots of support. Thanks everybody for being so engaged and involved on the chat. What I'll do now